Hi there, I'm Alexis Kingsbury, and in this recorded session of the presentation that I delivered at the ACCA Roadshow, I'm going to be talking you through how to put processes into practice, particularly how to build scalable systems, delegate work, and transform the client's experience by making it really consistent and work much more effectively. I want to start off with essentially a big question, which is, why do we need processes? Well, as an accountancy business, people and technology is essentially what you are selling. People and technology. That's what the nature of the business that you're in is. But without processes, growth is going to be slow and painful. So for example, there's a fast growth accountancy practice that I was working with, and I learned that fairly recently, before I started sort of running interviews with them, they had lost two really great account managers in just a few weeks, which is an absolute nightmare scenario because those are so crucial in terms of all the relationships with the clients and so on. So they quickly set about recruiting a new accounts manager, or plural, in fact. Now, the first two people that went through the process and they got to a point where they're like, yeah, these are great, they made offers to, and they rejected those offers. Now, fortunately, they did manage to find a real A player who was a great fit for them, who was willing to accept an offer, but they had a 3-month notice period. Now, the first thing, by the way, is if you've got a recruitment process that sometimes ends in turning down an offer, you need to improve your process, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. But in this particular case, they did manage to find someone that's willing to accept the offer, need to work their notice, and the practice owner thought, well, that's no problem. I need time to get ready for them anyway. So they made the job offer, it was accepted, and they began rebalancing workload amongst the other managers to get ready for their arrival. And that was in itself a super painful exercise. They hadn't got a process for how they reallocate clients or hand over clients and so on. So it took ages, but they figured that it would be worth it at the end. A week before the start date, they reached out to the new account manager to just confirm a few things and get them their details to set them up on payroll. And the new account manager said, oh, I'm really sorry about this. I have accepted an offer somewhere else. I didn't hear from you for over 2 months, and so I assumed it wasn't happening. Now, that's an example of a lack of employee onboarding process meant that they hadn't been contacted for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and as a result had assumed the worst. Now, how did the practice fix that? Did they fix the process? No. Instead, they hired a manager that could start the very next week. And that didn't work out, and of course, it cost them a huge amount of time and money. Now, unfortunately, this is something that I see quite a lot. I've interviewed over 100 owners and leaders in accountancy and bookkeeping practices in which I've collected stories like this. Not just epic fails, but best practices as well. And I share many of these on my podcast on De-Stress Your Business, where we show business leaders how to get incredible results without constant stress. Now, I should say I'm not an accountant or bookkeeper. I did used to do my bookkeeping for my own businesses, but I now hire people to do that. I'm a serial entrepreneur with a consultancy practice and 2 software businesses. AirManual is one of my software businesses where we work with businesses to implement best practice processes so they can free up their time, grow faster and less stress, essentially, which is one of the big reasons why I'm an expert on implementing processes in businesses and particularly accounting practices, is because of how much we do that over there. But my bigger why is because I used to be an epic fail story too, really. Like, why I got into particularly helping with processes and so on is because it was something I really struggled with throughout my business career. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Problem is, in the first 10 years, I really struggled to build any of my businesses. I had 10 attempts before I was able to grow any of my businesses beyond just me. But even when I did start to see some business success, I used to work crazy hours, feeling stressed and struggling to look after my health or nurture the relationships that are most important to me, even the one with the woman who I realized was my soulmate. And so at a time in my life where I was regularly working evenings and weekends to build a future for us both, really, that was the idea, I found out that she was spending her thinking on how to kick me out. So I decided to change the way that I was attempting to build my business and instead learned how to use structure and processes to make the businesses that I built more enjoyable for me and for my team, but to essentially give us time for what matters most. Now, fortunately, the result of that was absolutely life-changing. My partner didn't chuck me out. Instead, we got married. We have 2 wonderful children, and I get to drop them off to school every morning. I sometimes even pick them up from school on my skateboard, which I learned to do at my son's request, despite the obvious danger, my fear of getting hurt, and my even more crippling fear of not looking like an absolute idiot. We've taken 6-week holidays in the summer where I'm not needed by my team. And when I do work, I'm not spending time supporting team members or juggling customers. I get to focus my time on making a bigger difference for more people, whether it's doing research, forming partnerships, speaking to large groups like I've been doing for ACCA and so on. And as a result, my businesses have quickly and profitably scaled to 7-figure revenue and a global remote team of amazing people, serving over 600 customers, including well-known brands such as 3M, Asahi, Fitness First, Google, Pepsi, Sony, Swarovski, PwC, Grant Thornton. And we've done all of that without external investment, all thanks to putting processes in place in our business. And not only that, but my team are super happy and engaged despite being 100% remote. So I know from my own experience that processes can change lives for the better, yet unfortunately I see way too many practices struggling with this. I recently spoke to the owner of an accountancy practice who had got 7 full-time employees, and she told me that she was at breaking point. She was working, or is working, 60 hours a week. She's been in and out of hospital for unexplained heart palpitations. She's been getting completely fed up with having to fix mistakes made by her staff because of the amount of rework that's done and errors, and she can only sort of bill a fraction of that back to the client. In fact, they had one example where one of her team had failed to bill a client for work done for a full year, which made it very difficult for them to recover that cash. And the firm as a whole burnt through her initially substantial cash reserves, and so she was at breaking point. Now, when I spoke to her, she was ready to fire everyone and start again. But she didn't want to let her clients down, and she doesn't have the time or the energy to be able to take on the client workload off her staff, even though that they're making all these mistakes. What would be the point anyway? Whenever she's hired in the past, she's not done better in more recent years, and so would still probably get the same results if she started and rehired and so on. So she feels completely trapped. And yet, this is just a process problem. She doesn't have good processes for recruitment, for employee and client onboarding, for training, for billing, for day-to-day work. So of course her team make mistakes, drop balls, and defer to her. And sadly, she doesn't feel like she can make time to fix this problem. Now, that's not true. It can literally take you less than an hour to getting a process documented and handed over and improved. But that's where she feels trapped. And based on my research, sadly, this happens a lot. So I was wondering, why is this? And I think it's partly because when a practice first starts, there's typically one or more people, the owners, who do all of the work. They wear all of the hats. And they start by getting some clients, making themselves busy with the day-to-day work until they start feeling like they aren't getting enough time on acquiring new clients. So then they move to the next stage by getting in people who can do the basics, the admin, the preparation of working papers, the bank reconciliations, then perhaps getting people in to actually prepare the accounts, the One of the big steps is handing over reviews and direct interaction with clients, reviewing and presenting year-end accounts, providing advisory services, etc. And that's a leap that many practice owners really particularly struggle with. But if they do manage to hand over client management, perhaps once they go to a bigger practice, perhaps 20 plus people, they can get to a point where actually they hire people who manage the most important areas of the business to free them up time to focus on strategy and leadership. And eventually it's possible to even hand that over to, and as part of my interviews, I've interviewed owners of accountancy practices who have no day-to-day role in the business whatsoever. So it is possible to go through this journey, but each jump has particular process obstacles that you have to overcome, whether it's the onboarding of your first staff member or the bringing in of a CEO. Each of those is really a challenge of what's the process that we have here and how do we make it easy for them to do a really great job. Now, one of the problems that this brings is that all of that requires people. And that's the very nature of owning an accountancy practice. You are building up a team of people supported by technology to provide a valuable service to clients. And as I've been doing my research in the accountancy industry, I hear a lot of talk about the global talent shortage. Now, there's lots of reasons that are driving that shortage, including retirement of baby boomers and the fear of AI and a desire for more flexibility and so on. So I want to give you 6 things that you can do to get A players into your practice despite the talent shortage. So the first is don't make the role too big. I've seen theoretical A players become C players just because they've got too much on their plate. I also recommend hiring for values and skills, not knowledge and experience. But what's more important is that they fit your organization, your culture, your ways of working, and they have the right behaviors, and then you can give them the guidance so that they can deliver the work. I've interviewed practice owners who have hired from outside the accountancy industry, including in retail and hospitality and so on, and got some of their best hires that way. I remember one practice owner who hired someone who had worked for Gordon Ramsay in a kitchen and hired them into an accountancy role. The cultural fit was more important, and then they could give them the training. Third, use a multi-step two-way selection process when you're doing your recruitment. You shouldn't be in a position where the right people, when you make your offer, don't accept it. The recruitment process is two-way. You are selling them on why they should join you as much as they are selling themselves to you. And so you've got to make sure that that process is a two-way one. Of course, you want to have a multi-stage process to make sure that you've got the right candidate or a good fit for your values, but also you need to be communicating your values and why people really like working at your organization so that they buy into that too. 4, cast the net wide. So if you can hire remote, hybrid, from outside the industry, more junior, that's a massive plus. If you need super experienced people that have already got all the knowledge and know how everything works and know the industry and the client segments that you work in already, you make it really hard to find great people because you're just making the pool that you can fish in so much smaller. So look to be able to cast the net wide and really challenge any restrictions you're placing or criteria that are particularly limiting that pool. 5th, make the role super attractive. I interviewed a practice owner who, like, one of their core values is making sure they don't put themselves on like a pedestal or put themselves in an ivory tower versus their client. They like to make it feel very comfortable that their clients can ask them anything, and as a result, part of it is how informal they make it. And one little way that they do that is that their job titles are things like head of awesomeness and zero hero and things, rather than just, head of accounts or whatever. And that's just one little way in which they try and inject a bit of fun and openness and reduce some of that sort of risk of it being too formal in the organization. So think about ways in which you can make it really attractive to work in your practice. And I've got episodes on all of those areas in the De-Stress Your Business podcast. Check out episodes 24 to 33 of the podcast to get loads more detail on some things that you can do around recruitment and employee onboarding as well. But the one that I want to really dive into is number 6, which is making it easy to do a great job. Because even if you can only hire average employees, you can get great results as long as you make it easy to do things the way you want them done. And most practices don't do this. They make it hard for team members to be good and, frankly, nearly impossible to deliver great performance. So if getting great talent is hard, don't make it harder by needing to hire unicorns. Oh yeah, they've got to have worked in a similar role elsewhere for the last 10 years, and they've used all the software tools that your practice uses, and their hobbies include reading tax legislation, experimenting with AI bookkeeping tools, and they have both a passion for getting all the details right in year-end accounts, but also are really good at having empathetic coaching sessions with clients, and they've got a great sense of humor and enjoy long walks on the beach and are into whatever films you're into. Stop hunting unicorns. You make it so hard for you to find great talent that's going to be a great fit. Instead, make it easy to do a great job. If you want to repeat success and reduce mistakes, we need to make sure that you systemize it. So let me take you through an example of what that looks like to really bring that to life. So at MBS Accountants, when we first started working with them, the problem they had got was that the owners were stuck in the day-to-day. Their client onboarding was particularly clunky. There was lots of drop balls when they were taking on these new clients. And so they stopped taking on new clients because the risk to their reputation was so high. But also they were really struggling with problem staff. And worse, they weren't even sure whether they were problem staff. They weren't sure whether it was just that actually their team members hadn't been given enough support, guidance, training, etc. to do a great job, or whether those team members weren't capable of doing a great job. So what do? Well, they focused on a specific problem. They focused on client onboarding and managed to create the guidance and the process that meant that the owners no longer needed to be involved in the client onboarding. They held their team accountable to following the process, and as a result, the drop balls and the mistakes and so on disappeared, and new clients began reporting onboarding as really smooth. In fact, they got referrals from those new clients to get them more new clients just as a result of the client onboarding before MBS had even started doing their accounts. But also the team felt happier and were managed as a result of this, of having this in place. And the really nice thing is, as a result, Samantha Morgan, one of the husband and wife duo that own it, said that now all processes are being followed to a T. There's now no excuses for staff to say they didn't know how to do X, Y, or Z. It's now easy to manage performance. Previously, processes weren't documented in a place that was easy to find, so I had to let people off the hook. Now, they didn't stop there. They started with one process, client onboarding, but then they repeated the exercise on each of the other biggest challenges in their business, documenting each thing as they went along. And so 18 months later, the business doesn't rely on the owners at all. They're able to make strategic acquisitions. Their profit grew by a huge amount. In fact, they won an award in a mastermind they're part of for the biggest growth in profit. And they've been attracting offers well beyond normal valuations and multipliers for the industry because of how stable it's made the business and how much risk it's reduced out of it and so on. But what I love most is the impact on the people. That's what I really care about. And as Samantha said, quite frankly, it's been awesome. The company runs smoothly and I just step in when they escalate something up to me, which usually just requires some reassurance or guidance rather than me needing to sort it. Health-wise, I'm now 6 stone lighter, a lot fitter, much happier in myself, and I believe a better person, wife, mum, and boss for it. And that's what I love, is when you get it right, you unlock your growth, but you enjoy the business more too. And so that's why I want you to think about how to make it easy to do a great job. And you can do that using good processes and guidance. Now, you might now be thinking, that's easier said than done. So I want to dive into a specific area of your practice so that you can see exactly how you do this. Now, I'm going to pick one process to explore this and demonstrate this as an example. In the roadshow itself, I offered 4 different processes that we could dive into, and there was a QR code which you can still use to vote for the one that you would have liked me to cover. But the nice thing is that although this is a recorded session, so obviously your votes will have absolutely zero impact on what I'm about to do now, the cool thing is, if you do fill in the details about what's the biggest problem in your practice, not only will you help my research, because I am collecting data on what are the most common problems that people have, but also I will send you a playbook that covers that problem that you've chosen in more detail. And it includes details on what happens where it's done badly, what are the top mistakes that this process aims to avoid. It gives you detailed step-by-step checklists that you can use as a starting point for your own practice. It gives you guidance on how to tailor it to your practice to make it extra relevant and also wow your clients and new team members. And it provides guidance on the kind of impact that you should expect from having a great process and how to measure it and how to get even more. So go to airmanual.link/get-your-SOP to get a playbook like the people did that were in the room when they attended these sessions live. But in the sessions live, I also used it to get a live vote from people on which area they'd like me to cover. The most common of all of the areas that was identified was client onboarding. So that's going to be the area that I'm going to give you an example on here. So let's start with what happens when it's done badly or when there's no process at all. What we tend to see is that when there's no process or it's got a poor process, firstly, the client feels completely overwhelmed. There's often mistakes that are made or questions that aren't asked early on that cause problems later. One interviewed, for example, said that they found that their clients weren't being asked for their UTR numbers, and as a result, it became a real problem when you're at like the 30th or 31st of January trying to file their first tax return for them, and you can't because you haven't got the UTR number. That's a terrible time to then have to ask the client for it. But also, this is your opportunity to start the relationship on the right foot. This is your opportunity to set expectations around how you work together and also who's going to work with them. I work with a lot of practice owners who they're the only people that have had 90% of the contact with the clients. And so they're a bottleneck for that reason. If your client onboarding doesn't set an expectation that the client's going to be working with other people other than the owner, then you can expect that the client is going to be a bit surprised, annoyed, frustrated when they suddenly have to work with someone else that's not the owner because that expectation wasn't set early on. Equally, it's your opportunity to set expectations of your client, including at what time of the year you're expecting them to provide their tax return income details, for example, which might be a sore point for many of you, depending on how close to the end of January you're listening to this. But yeah, so you need to make sure that you're doing all those things. Now, in terms of the mistakes that we see, typically it includes giving lots of requests to the client all at once, so it overwhelms them, not setting those expectations, as I say, both for the client but also from the client, but also missing the potential for referrals. Your client onboarding process is the first big experience that the client has of you and your practice and the team. And so if you can give them a great experience and then ask for feedback and make sure that they've had a great experience and they have had a great experience, you can ask for referrals at that point, which can really help you grow your practice faster. So what does this look like? How do we address these issues? Well, if I show you a checklist that you'll find in the playbook, which is our best practice template for onboarding a new client, you'll see it's got a series of steps, both at high level, so kicking off the onboarding, and then within that you've got various steps like reviewing the client intake form and confirming the proposal's been accepted and preparing the welcome package and so on. But also we go into a lot of detail. So I want to show you a bit of how much detail we go into. So for example, if we go into the conducting the kickoff meeting, you'll see we've got essentially an agenda of all the things that we'd cover in there, including sharing expectations. And we might even include in this checklist, and in fact, it definitely does in the playbook, which is more up to date than this. It provides guidance on exactly how we set those expectations and the questions we ask and so on. Later in the template, we've got a step on how to ask for referrals and how to make it easy to ask for referrals, including sorts of things you might say to segue nicely into asking for a referral, because typically people struggle with that. So for example, they might say, oh, is there anyone you can think of that might like working with us? And that's it. That's not going to get you a referral. So you can do that, but also you might include steps that are easily forgotten, like thanking a referrer if this client came via a referral. So that's a step that's easy to forget, but if you thank people that gave you referrals, you're more likely to get more referrals from them. So those are some of the ways in which you can add that level of detail to make it easy for your team to do things the way that you want them done. And of course, if you come up with an improvement or someone makes a mistake, you can attack the process and look at how to improve the process so that that improvement always happens or that mistake never happens. So, to give you some key takeaways from this session, when you provide that level of guidance to your team, when you make it easy to do a great job, training is faster, you get better results from your clients, you can do more with the results that and the resources that you have. You stop repeated mistakes, you stop the repeated questions, you extract yourself from the day-to-day, which means you can spend more time on what matters most. So I really believe, and have seen it many, many times, processes, putting that guidance in place unlocks your growth without the stress. The other key takeaway for you is please don't hunt unicorns, especially when you're looking at a talent shortage. Instead, give guidance. Make it easier to do a great job than a bad one. And finally, you can extract yourself from the day-to-day, one process at a time. You don't need to think, oh, I need to document my whole business overnight. Like MBS accountants, you can just start off with one, maybe client onboarding or sorting out performance management, recruitment or employee onboarding or tax returns or whatever it is. You can start just by extracting yourself from that one process or improving that one process and then repeat that exercise across the business. And I've found that often it kind of works in a spiral as you work in different areas to solve those things. If you'd like to learn more and get more tips and deeper dives, please do check out my podcast. It's De-Stress Your Business. You can find it on YouTube and there's a sort of fast link to get there, destressyourbusiness.com, but you'll also find it on Apple and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. We're actually now up to over 150 episodes with some amazing content in there from some fantastic interviews and guests. Recent episodes at the point of recording this include interviews with Paul Applin OBE, with Rachel Harris, also known as Accountancy, interviewed Graham Tennick on how he removed crunch time stress from his business by putting in the processes there. I've interviewed Mike McAllowitz on implementing and using Profit First. I've had some great episodes in which we've really sort of dived into very specific process issues and causes of stress. So please do check out that, and please do subscribe so that you find out when we share a new episode. But also do connect with me. Do connect with me on social media. Feel free to email me, particularly if you'd like a deep dive into a different process that I've not covered, or you'd like a particular recommendation of an episode based on the problem that you're facing. Yeah, do share what you're struggling with. I always love to help. And if I haven't got a resource that I can share that's relevant, I'm sure that I can connect you to someone or some other resource that you'll find useful, because I have spent so much of my time, particularly over the last 18 months, really diving into accountancy practices and understanding what makes the difference between it being smooth and fast growth and so on versus stressful and getting stuck and feeling like you're going in circles and so on. And I'm very fortunate to work with lots of fantastic accountancy practices, including Assure UK and Progress Accountants and Ad Valorem and Morris Crocker and all sorts of fantastic practices out there. So yeah, thank you everyone that I've worked with and everyone that's been part of my research project to help input to that. And indeed, thank you to everyone that was involved in the ACCA event, because I got a lot from that too. Do reach out to me if you've got any questions, if there's anything I can help with. Don't hesitate to reach out. But otherwise, thank you so much for listening to me for this session. I hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please do tag me on social media or send me an email. I'd really, really appreciate it. But otherwise, thank you to all of you and to the ACCA and to Jordan and the team at Journey for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.